This is Duke University.
Bailout, fiscal stimulus, and liquidity are terms peppering news reports these days. But behind those words are hundreds of years' worth of ideas from economists. A new Duke University Center for the History of Political Economy studies this history of economic thought. Center member Roy Weintraub says the late British economist John Maynard Keynes looms large in current thinking. Weintraub says Keynes would support government intervention, such as the bailout of the auto industry, but not under that name.
Bailout is one of those words that comes from older and wrong ways of thinking. We're not bailing out the auto industry. We're attempting to make it work. It's going to require some help because they couldn't do it themselves. But the costs of their continuing to not do it well are now immense. So we need intervention. We need a plan, investment plan for the auto industry, which is guided by some larger vision than the current and past automakers have been able to provide themselves. That's a very Keynesian idea. What Keynes called the animal spirits of the entrepreneur have to be re-energized. We have to restore business confidence. And this can be done by assuring business, ensuring financial institutions that we will not allow the world to collapse. We know what to do, we can do it. The world will not collapse. As it doesn't collapse, more confidence becomes apparent, more projects begin to get undertaken, and hey, we've begun a recovery. These are all Keynesian ideas.
How would John Keynes testify before Congress?
Maynard Keynes would testify before Congress that by knocking down every one of the arguments for not allowing industry to flourish. You say this is socialism. Let's talk about this. We're interested in restructuring, in getting more jobs. Unemployment compensation. Oh, you think we should not extend unemployment benefits? How are people going to pay for the things that others will be trying to produce without the income? We have to provide the incomes. So he would be arguing all of those kinds of programs, all of the kinds of stimulation packages.
I think a lot of times when people think of economics, it's a practical, present-day, contemporary social science that you use and it helps you make money. So why study the history of economics?
Can I read you something from the general theory? This is probably the most famous passage. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. Soon or late, is his last sentence, it is ideas, not vested interests, which are dangerous for good or evil.
Okay, now you say that a pivotal event in the development of economics as a professional and academic discipline was World War II. Why is that?
We were running a centrally planned economy, a war economy. It wasn't a question of whether we were ever going to be socialists. We were running a centrally planned economy. Duke's most illustrious graduate, our law school graduate, Richard Nixon, what was he doing? He was sitting in the Office of Price Administration setting prices. Okay? He was a lawyer, but others were economists doing these kinds of things. John Kenneth Galbraith, for example. So the economists as advisors were there. Economists as data understanders had to be there. This was the source of, we had to know how much steel there was. We had to know how much steel was required for aircraft, airframe construction. So we had to have a really good data-based understanding of the economy. And as well, we had to have an understanding of how other economies operated. The OSS was, in fact, heavily the purview not just of motorcycle riding gunslingers, but economists. You had one of probably Duke's most famous early founding members of the University Economics Department, Calvin Bryce Hoover, was effectively a founding member of OSS and played a major role.
OSS?
Office of Strategic Services, which was the forerunner of the CIA. Hoover was involved in estimates of wartime production and productive activity in Nazi Germany. He had written the first book on the economics of the Third Reich, had visited continuously in the 1930s. So all of that kind of data-based reasoning came into play in the war effort, and the modeling. How do you figure out, how do you have a model for how you run a convoy, for how you should get quality control on a production line for hand grenades? All of these kinds of things came together in World War II.
You've been at Duke for more than 30 years now, and studying the history of economics for at least half of that time. Why study this subject here at Duke?
Duke is unusual. Duke is certainly the strongest place in the world to study the history of economics. We created the largest archives in the history of economics anywhere. We have the papers of 7 Nobel laureates. We have scholars coming from all over the world on a regular basis to the Rare Books, Manuscript, and Special Collections Department, where the so-called Economist Papers Project is lodged, the papers of very, very many economists. What do we pride ourselves here at Duke? We're interdisciplinary, and we don't just say it, we are. So the history of economics here is profoundly connected to all kinds of groups. The first set of lectures I gave on game theory at Duke University, I gave to the zoology department, followed by discussions with the experimental psychology department. You have all of the kinds of connections between, say, biology and economics, in terms of Malthus receiving due credit from Darwin for having helped him develop his ideas by understanding what Malthus was really talking about. These days, history of economics points ways both in technical areas, like the emerging field of neuroeconomics, to quest deeper and emergent questions in psychology and how these have operated in the past in the field. It's all over the place, and it's tremendous fun.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.